Well, today we are celebrating 55 years of WCSC Incorporated, and I want to congratulate the gentleman who's with us right now, John M. Rivers, Sr., Chairman of the Board, Treasurer of WCSC Incorporated. Good to have you with us this afternoon, and you've been with the station just about from the onset, haven't you?
Well, actually, of course, the station was started in 1930 by Mr. Burke, who was a Harvard pilot, and Mr. Jordan, who was in the music business on King Street. I didn't come in until 1938, and of course, the situation today is so much different from what it was then. For example, we had fun. The staff probably violating a few rules, and we would do a show from the Garden Theater. So we threw a baseball with a wire attached to it across from Francis Marion Hotel on the top floor over to the Garden Theater, and we had a remote broadcast. It was just as simple as that. Now, of course, today, you'd call a telephone company, you'd make the provision, or you would have your own equipment that we could move around. But in those days, we just did it by ear. Sometimes, for instance, from the Hibernian Hall on occasions, we would cut into the telephone line, dial a number, and have with a microphone and amplifiers, and we had a remote broadcast from using a telephone line, not courtesy of the telephone company against their better rules. But nevertheless, we had fun.
You were pioneers in the real sense then, weren't you? I mean,
well, in
you
a
had
way,
to make your own
yeah,
ways.
After all, it was just like we didn't know you couldn't do it, so we did it.
Right. So I guess it was a lot of fun, but then a lot of trial and tribulation, too, back then.
There was, and the biggest thing, of course, back in the 30s and the early 40s was the fact that most people just didn't think radio was here to stay. And particularly the advertiser. Most of them, for instance, would test it, and they would hide an item and then put it on radio and expect it to sell. Of course, the newspaper was the principal competition, and people would walk in with the newspaper ad, and golly, this would make an awful impression on the advertiser. And our salespeople, myself included, had to compete with that. Not only here, but one of the great competitions was against WBT in Charlotte, which modestly claimed to cover the whole state of South Carolina. And when we went to CBS in 1944, my job in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and other places where there was an advertiser was to convince them that WCSC was in business and that Charlotte didn't cover the whole state of South Carolina.
1944 was the year that you bought the station, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In July of that year.
And that was, of course, a very interesting experience, and sort of frightening in a way, because after all, we laid it on the line. If it didn't work, that was it. And I was getting to the age then when if you failed, you were hardly employable. And of course, I'm well beyond that age now.
I'm getting at about that age myself, so I know what you're talking about. Tell us some of the interesting experiences you may have had back in early radio on CSC.
Well, one of the most dramatic ones in many respects, and for some time it was almost funny. It was a young man who decided that he wanted to become a political figure. And the way to do it was to attack the then governor of South Carolina, Bernard Maybank. And Bernard was a Charleston boy and extremely popular. So this young man wrote out a speech, and I looked at it and talked to our attorneys, and he said, well, it was a little libelous, but go ahead and put it on. And having a sort of feeling that something might go wrong, I said to my wife, I said, let's go on up to the radio station tonight, and maybe something would need some attention. And we got up there and got up on the 12th floor of Francis Marion Hotel. And lo and behold, this young man and his father came charging back up and said, there's a mob down in the lobby of the hotel and they're going to lynch me. I said, well, I told you when you were making this speech that you might not make any friends with it, and that there was a freight elevator, and you better get on that freight elevator and get out, which they did. Meantime, I suggested to my wife she call the police. I got in the elevator, went back down into the lobby, and there were probably 30, 40 people there, and they were not exactly friendly. And standing in the entrance to the elevator, they said, we're going to go up there and get that fella. I said, "Now, wait a minute. This man is a guest in our place. We got to protect him. So you'll have to come in here by removing me." I wasn't going to fight, but unfortunately, about that time, before anybody could prove to be a hero, the police arrived and the country was safe.
The station went on the air 55 years ago. You joined it in 1938. You joined the station as a general manager. Was that the year you also became manager?
I came in as president of the company and managed the station on 1st January 1938. And my qualifications were at best limited. As president of the Chamber of Commerce in 1936, I had made a speech on WCSC radio, and before becoming president and general manager, I had gone to Radio City. We were then on the NBC radio network, and taken a tour of Radio City. Mr. Hip, president of Liberty Life, and the gentleman with whom I had done business, and said to me, when I told him, I said, "Mr. Hip, I don't know anything about radio." He said, "You got sense, haven't you?" And I said, "Well, I hope so." And he says, "It's a business." He says, "Run it like a business. It's show business, but it's the kind of business that anybody can adapt to, and you ought to be able to do all right with it." So that's it. And fortunately, it came by, and I'll tell you this much: there's an awful lot of shoe leather in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Cleveland, Dallas, Charleston, representing effort to promote Charleston, WCSC, and radio in general. Well,
you've done a good job over the years. Is there anything else you want to say here before we get back into music?
Well, not really. As a matter of fact, I'm glad to be here. After all, when you've been in this business for over 40 years, the fact that you can still stand up and talk is something of a miracle in itself.
Maybe you're a miracle of some sort. You've certainly done a great job with this station over the years. It is one of the premier stations, certainly in South Carolina, and probably one of the best stations in the country, really, the entire operation, which says a lot for you and the people, I guess, you've had working with you down through the years, and you've put some awfully good ones through WCSC over the years.
I couldn't agree with you more.